Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Power 365 show. Today, we chat with Dumesh. She's the Principal Program Manager of CDS. So she knows a lot about what goes on in the Common Data Service. Let's drill into her insights, what she shares, best practices for implementing CDS, and what we can expect in the future. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/184. Now let's get on with the show. Maya, welcome to the Power 365 show.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Of course, I know you work with Ryan Jones and you're part of the core CDS team. And so I'm going to enjoy unpacking that and your views on it. But before we get started, where do you live, work, and play? What part of the world do you come from, and where do you live now?
I'm currently in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. I'm here since 1996. I moved to the US in 92, but I grew up in Riga, which is the capital of Latvia. So I've been all over the world. The accent that you hear is Russian. My mom was working as a COBOL programmer a long time ago when the COBOL was developed in the 80s, and my dad was a typical MBA. So I grew up thinking that I can do anything and moved into US to get my education here. I met my husband in Latvia, and we both moved in US. I graduated from University of Washington with a computer science degree some time ago.
Tell me about Latvia. If I was to visit Latvia, what are the places you'd recommend I go to, and what is the food you'd recommend that I should eat?
The Latvia is in the Baltic Sea, so the places that I would recommend people to go is usually to the sea. There is a resort called Jurmala, which is very nice. And as far as food, I find most of the food is delicious in Latvia, but maybe because I grew up there. It is a combination of different European cuisines.
So when you're not working at Microsoft, what do you do outside of Microsoft?
Um, I traveled all over Europe, America, Australia, and New Zealand. And I also have two kids. So one of them lives in Oxford right now in UK. So I travel there, and my son is in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, getting his education. So I travel there. So I travel a lot.
Yeah, nice. What's your favorite country so far that you've been to, visited?
For visiting or for living?
No, for visiting.
For visiting, I'm. I like visiting a lot of places. I loved South Africa for visiting. It was wonderful. New Zealand was beautiful, but quite empty, but very green. So I find that the different places have something new to offer. That's why I've traveled a lot.
Yeah, nice. Any travel destinations that you want to go to and just haven't had a chance yet?
Asia, we were planning to go to Asia, but now with everything that's going on today in the world, we don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, so true. It was interesting with the whole COVID-19. One of the states in the US I saw recently just put a call out for COBOL programmers. So they obviously have got some old systems that they need work done on, right? That they'd be putting a request out like that.
Yeah, that is quite old. I'm hoping that they're moving from one to another, and that's why they need something.
It's transitioning. So tell me, how did you end up coming to work for Microsoft?
My first stint at Microsoft was in 1999 until 2005. I was a developer in SQL product unit. And then I left full-time job at Microsoft to spend more time with my kids. Because both myself and my husband worked at Microsoft at the same time, and we realized that that is kind of hard to do with two little kids and the family and things. So I stayed home for a very short time, but I was not able to do that for a long time just because I found that I like working. So returned back to Microsoft and did a lot of different contracts over the years. Sorry. Because it allowed a flexible work-life balance. I would come in and I would say, I work 9 to 5. I will do whatever you need me to do, but my evenings are mine. And then I was looking for yet another contract job. They're usually about a year in duration. And I found a job as an architect at Nordstrom. Nordstrom is one of department stores here in US, and the headquarters is in Seattle. And I worked there until 2017 when I decided to move again and become a PM rather than developer or architect. And so I found a job at Dynamics, and Dynamics asked me to look at the data space for moving forward with CDS as a data store for a Power Platform and Dynamics overall. So that's how I got here.
With the role of PM, kind of what does your day to day or week to week or month to month job look like as a PM?
I find because I'm a technical PM, I'm working on the platform. Pixels is not something that I do day to day. And the UI is not kind of in my prerogative. So what I'm doing is a lot of work closer to architecture work, a lot of work with different data stores, understanding how to store the data, how our system is designed, helping customers. I'm doing a lot of customer calls, and also looking forward, seeing what kind of problems our customers are seeing with the system and how can we help them with those problems. Um, that is basically my day-to-day work. I work a lot with the devs, of course, and the dev leads, often on their stand-ups and helping with different sign-offs.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, okay, so that's interesting. So, what area are you PMing specifically within the Dynamics suite?
I am a group product manager for the data, search, and reporting capabilities of a common data service. So I lead the team of several PMs.
Excellent. Okay, so you're right in the whole CDS common data service area. Now, there's been a bit of confusion over time around what's the difference between the common data service versus the common data model. Now, I have my views. I've heard lots of views on this. What I'm interested in is your view. How do you explain this to people? The difference between the two.
So the way I look at it is by unpacking what the definition is. So for a common data model, definition states that it is the contract for the shared um, items between applications and the data sources. In other words, it is a reference architecture. Another way to think about it is we're defining within common data model what are different formats and the standards for data within it. Whereas common data service is an easily structured variety of data and business logic to support interconnected applications and processes in a secure and compliant way. In other words, it is materialized model of a data. So, for example, data model can be defined in the common data model as a definition, but in order for you to actually store the data, something needs to be present in order to receive your data and keep it. And that is what Common Data Service provides. It provides the structures to keep your data, whereas Common Data Model provides the reference architecture, the idea of how to store the data.
I like it. I like it. So, can you unpack for me when you think about data storage? What are the kind of key things that you're thinking about?
So there is different types of data storage. Data or a data. Data can be relational, non-relational, files, binaries. Data could be transactional or historical. It can have the audit, we can have an audit data, we can have a semi-structured data. So all of these types of data can be stored within the common data service in a different formats or entities using different fields.
Are you seeing any kind of do you see a future where there'll be other types of data, or does all data that currently in existent now fit within one of those categories?
That is loaded question. I think there is a lot of people thinking about different types of data. For example, there is like IoT data, which Internet of Things. And you can think about it as non-structured data, but it also flies very fast. So it needs to be streamed very fast into some location. Right now, data lake seem to be the appropriate location for it, or the Cosmos DB, but we don't know. Maybe Microsoft will come up with a completely new technology, or overall, the industry will come up with a completely new technology, which will allow us to stream data much faster than either data lake or Cosmos provides right now. So hopefully we will be able to deal with it easily within the common data service.
So, as you were saying that, what jumped to my mind was quantum computing. And um, is that anything like on the far edges, maybe, of what you are thinking about at the moment? And I mean, that's more around the compute side of things, but of course, it's going to have a data implication. Is that something that's on your radar?
Not currently. We are not that advanced at the time, but hopefully at some time in the future when we are ready to talk about quantum computing for everyday tasks, this is something that we will look into, and hopefully I will be part of it.
Tell me about best practice. Best practice is kind of loaded as well, but what are you seeing as best practice around the way people implement CDS and even apply data models in respect to their CDS environments?
One of the things that we're trying to provide is a common data service, which means that we're hoping that each tenant and organization can find something common within their data store and not keep the data store separate as we used to in the last 20 or 30 years. Because what happens then that we remove the need for the ETL and can use data completely natively within our systems. So one of the things that I ask people to do is look at the applications that they trying to build any new applications and look at the data store that they already have. If there is already data that they need, it is better to reuse the common data service rather than create a completely new data store. That would be one of the practices I've not seen many of our customers implementing. Um, we're also publishing a lot of practices around the security of the data, and we would like customers to use those. Um, the types of data that you store is important. And when the entities are created, it is important to make sure that the fields are appropriately named and sized so that it is easier to do the searching and indexing on the data that you're storing within our systems, because hopefully you don't store the data just because you store it because you need it for some reason in the future.
Yeah. So just on that, um, around data security, what enhancements or what is, yeah, let's go back to the best practice. What best practice are you seeing around data security in the implementation of CDS? In other words, where clients are doing this right.
Um, Making sure that the minimum amount of data is available to the particular role by applying the correct permissions and privileges is very important. I'm not saying that you need to hide the data from each other within the organization. What I'm saying is that the less people can see, the more secure the data is. So keeping it to the role is important. Um, Making sure that authorization is there and it's in groups. We are providing different types of groupings for authorization. That is important as well because applying group security is easier than trying to understand each individual user's appropriate roles and security context.
I really like that comment you made. The less they see, the more secure the data is. So really creating that segregation of data based on one's role is important.
Right. As we talked before, I would like us to keep data in one place, but it does not mean that we would like to expose all the data to all the users. That is what our security model is for.
Yeah. So on the security model, I've been working with Dynamics since 2003, and the way the security model define or the UI, and I know you said you don't have much to do with the UI, hasn't changed that much, and it's almost blown out to become a bit unmanageable. Is there going to be work done to kind of more modernize that kind of experience
The UI experience for the security
for
and
security?
privileges.
Yeah,
I- As far as I know, yes, it is one of the aspects of moving to the new unified control interface or UCI. I think it is just a little bit um, at the back end of this work because we were trying to make sure that the front end that are more exposed to the average user capabilities are there first. And this is more of the administrative part. But yes,
makes sense. Tell me about binary data. That's a new data type, isn't it? That's come out recently.
yes, it is storage of the files or binary data within our systems. Previously, it was possible to store attachments within notes one to one, and it was possible to store attachments within emails or calendar items. But there was no other way to store the binaries. What we did is added a new file data type, which allows customers to store binaries in any entities. It is data type, so it's an additional field within your entity.
Yeah. What's the use cases that you're already seeing people starting to adopt with it?
Oh, we are doing a lot of internal use cases as well. The solutions are usually defined in the XML files, so those moved into the file data type because it's a file. We see people trying to upload images. We've seen asks for videos, small videos, or movies. Um, a lot of documents, especially in places where you need to sign something quickly and move forward in like Power Automate flows and things like that. So we see a lot of usage for a file.
Is there going to be best practices around though? Those three types where whether it's image, whether it's video, whether it's document. Um, Are you wanting like, in my upbringing, in my experience was we'd always say, hey, put that unstructured data over into SharePoint or put it somewhere else. Don't put it in CDS because back then, CDS, of course, was predominantly SQL and more expensive type storage structure as well. Are you saying now that you don't have to worry about that so much? It can all just sit in CDS because behind the scenes you're managing, what data store it sits in?
That is exactly correct because of the way we define the data in your different data types. Um, the data actually stored in a not in in a SQL, not in Azure SQL in the relational data store, but it's stored in Azure Blob, which is a better storage for the binary data like that. Um, we are extending Common Data Service to include many different stores, and usually we're trying to keep the stores themselves away from the customers, but mostly define it in terms of the file data types or entities. Oh, sorry, data types or entities which customers can use in order to define their solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about what you're saying there is that you're abstracting it away as in, so just because you knew how to use Cosmos DB doesn't mean that because CDS is using it, you're going to have kind of that level of access, right?
Right. The level of access will be to the common data service through the organization, not to the back end of where we're storing the data. And this is kind of the way that we did it with the relational data store as well.
Yeah, totally. Mm-mm-mm. Any kind of new things that you'll be releasing as part of the wave one that you're excited about?
We're finishing the file in such a way that we are creating model um, controls to use the files and images. We are adding some capabilities around customer insights, which are internal to the CDS, but externally customers will be able to get much more insights. We're previewing a couple of interesting new capabilities around using of Power BI um, for showing off the data within common data services, but that's
Okay.
just a preview for now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What about some years ago the separation happened between Dynamics 365 finished applications and the data store with CDS. Is there anything that you're doing now that is specific to support Dynamics 365 users as opposed to those building natively on top of CDS using Power Apps?
Actually, because we did the separation of the Dynamics 365, moving the applications out of backend, so to say, or separating backend and the front end, what we did, we created OData endpoints in between. The same OData endpoints are used for Power Apps as used for the first party applications or Dynamics 365 applications like sales, marketing, um, talent, and others. So my group is, or myself, is responsible for OData endpoint and everything below it. But Dynamics for CRM applications and Power Apps applications using exactly the same OData endpoint. So what we find is if our customers that are creating Power Apps or our customers that creating, let's say, sales application require an additional functionality, that functionality usually needed for other side of our business.
Mm-mm-mm. Okay, okay. So they are getting crossover. Just one other thing there in the Dynamics 365, there used to always be so many different ways of doing search, where there was relevant search, where There, of course, is quick find and the way to filter views of data, etc. What are you thinking about the future of search within CDS?
Oh, I'm glad that you asked. We're doing a lot of work in right now around making sure that we unify the search experience and provide one search experience within the organization instead of creating like categorized search and a relevant search. It was relevant at the time when people needed to know so much about the dynamics in order to administer it that by definition there was always somebody within an organization who would be the administrator of the dynamics, be it sales or marketing, and they can figure out what kind of search experience the customers mostly need within their organization. As we're moving forward and trying to serve our citizen developers through Canvas apps and model apps, Power Apps, I mean, and Power Automate, but also still support our more advanced applications provided by Microsoft, like sales and marketing, with a lot of different workflows within them. We found that search experience need to be simplified. So one of the things that we're doing right now is making sure that we separate the search experience and the filter experience. In other words, if you don't know where you put something, you are searching for it. And that's one experience. If you know exactly the entity and you just need to find the particular row because you filter on a particular columns, it's more of a find experience. That you will usually find in the grids and things like that. And we're supporting grids. That experience, we're making sure that it's modernized with new grids, more filtering, more capabilities. But then on the other side, making sure that the search experience is available to the customer as well. We're trying to bound it to the application that you are in at the time. So if application has two or three entities, the search results need to be appropriate to those entities and not overall organization. And so there is a lot of work going on trying to figure out how to do it as seamless as possible, but then at the same time provide what you want.
Yeah. How do you prevent kind of people not breaking search? I've been on projects, come into projects where people had created a query that was so large and so all encompassing that it took minutes, multiple minutes to actually run. And because it was just totally engineered wrong. And what you were talking about there is restricting search to within the application that's been built. Um, is there also a way to, let's say somebody had all the applications, so they had, what would have been traditional sales, customer service, and let's say marketing, and they would have that broadness of search. Is there any way to kind of restrict down, or plans, probably more to the point, so that searching doesn't become too wide and therefore create too much, the data set potentially that it's searching is too large?
Yes, there's several different types of experience that we have in the frames right now, and it's still in frames. We don't know yet how the end result will look, but one is more simple one where you just type the word or uh, of sentence of what you're trying to find, and then it's looking for the overall information within the overall applications that you have installed. But then there is other ways where you can define the entities within which you are searching, and you have like a visual cues as to how to create this particular searching experience correctly. Also, on the other side, when you create your applications and you're in the maker experience, we're working on some ways to define what is searchable, what is filterable, and how to set up your entities in such a way that sometimes some things you just don't want to search through because it is not the things that is interesting in that way. It's just an information that needed for a completely different reasons.
Yeah. So another, search criteria is when you're searching for something that doesn't exist, but you want that information. So, for example, give me all the records that um, have never had a communication with, or that we've never mailed to them over at a period of time. Are you going to, to create, the capturing of all the records where something doesn't apply to? Is that already there? I mean, I saw that something was put in to the application, some like this concept of outer joins was put in, but there was never any UI that accompanied it. Is that something that's going to be addressed moving forward?
It is there in the platform, and I believe there is some work going on the UI side to make sure that it is addressed. But um, I think it is possible to do now through the filtering experience. It is harder to do in the search experience, something like that.
Yeah, I just realized I asked you a UI question, and that's not your area as well. So I totally understand that. What you touched on there about Power BI and how that will work more with CDS. What's a bit more of the detail around that?
Um, we are still trying to figure out the best connector to the CDS
Mm-hmm.
from Power BI, and so we are working around figuring out the best way to provide that data. For now, there's about 3 different connectors to the common data services, and all three have, or dynamics, and all three have different types of issues.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to make sure that we can address most of them
Will we
and
get to one?
include the security. Yes, I'm
Yeah,
hoping.
that's the goal.
That's a goal,
Awesome.
yes.
So another, common thing that I hear in the industry is around data models and CDS, and I suppose the ability to apply a data model, as you referred to the reference model, straight into CDS. In other words, build me out these tables, these relationships, and I want that just dropped into my CDS instance. And at the moment, there's the only way. So let's say we take Dynamics 365 sales, for example. If I wanted to have that data structure in my CDS instance, even though I might not be using Dynamics 365 sales, I would have to, get a license of that, drop it in there, and then I would at least have, let's say, an opportunity entity or a lead entity, and all the appropriate fields and relationships that were there. Is there plans around making that a much simpler a method? In other words, that I could perhaps go to GitHub and go, give me the data model for customer service, and just drop that into my CDS instance, because I'm going to build a new application, but I do want it to perhaps reference some fields of that first party application.
Not at the moment, because what you get by solution is not just a model itself, not just entity frames, but
Mm-hmm.
also the methods and actual plugins associated with the business logic around the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sales solution. And without that, um, model is not necessarily going to make sense. However, you can use the model in order to sync two different systems if that
Mm-hmm.
is what you would like to do.
Mm. The big thing that that I've heard is people do just want an entity out of a traditional app. In other words, they don't want to recreate the wheel, because if the customer, let's say you've built the Power App for them, and then in future they're going to use that same CDS environment, and they're going to then, let's say, go on buy Microsoft licensing for Dynamics 365 sales, because they just wanted that opportunity entity as an example. So what you don't want is two opportunity entities, right? You don't want the one that's provided by Dynamics 365 sales, and then the one you created in CDS as a temporary stopgap measure, until 3 years down the track, where the customer's going to acquire that piece of software as well. Do you see that there's potentially a way or a methodology that would allow that type of situation where you don't want all the logic, you just want the database structure, the table structure, really?
I think in order to create a table structure, that is why we provided a common data model, so that everybody understands what the structure of the particular entity is. So this is one of the reasons why we are not providing it out of the box. Also, because of the way solutions layer, even if you have exactly the same solution, you will have a completely different entity, I believe, because of the different prefix.
Yeah. In fact, though, just when you said about solutions there, I can see it be orphaned if it wasn't in some type of solution framework in how you could apply that. That does make sense. That does make sense. What are you most excited about in the next 12 months in CDS, or what's your kind of long term views of what's possible?
One of the things that I'm really excited is all the different data types, as we described them, that are coming along. There are some non-relational data store data types that we're going to present our customers with if they don't know the structure ahead of time and want to store something. Um, wild adoption of the file and image. I know that at least it was in the Microsoft, some people are working on the 3D models and things like that and applications. So we're looking forward to that. Another area that we didn't talk about yet is the fact that we're also opening up the back end of the Dynamics financials and operations, Dynamics F&O, through the Power Apps and Power Automate. So what it will allow you to do is have a little bit better seamless understanding between your sales and marketing departments and your financial and operations structures in order to move all the data seamlessly within the Dynamics family of applications. I think that is interesting as well.
So that's going to give the people creating apps, etc., much more flexibility, isn't it, around accessing data within their applications? Is that right?
Yes, you should be able to access most of F&O data from the Power Apps or Power Automate or Power BI for that matter. F&O has its own Power BI capabilities and reporting capabilities, but that's a little bit different way.
What role do you think AI will play in CDS future? Is there thinking around how AI will either play into it or be part of CDS?
Yes, actually, we do have some capabilities around it. One of the things that Power Platform family provides is AI Builder. AI Builder's backend is the CDS, and we allow customers to store data within the data lake, run your ML or machine learning models on top of that, and then provide the scorecards back to the CDS entities in a particular field that allows anybody to see the finished product from the AI, but not necessarily have access directly to all the data within the entity. But administrator, of course, that is running AI Builder have access to the data lake information in order to run them their models. The similar kind of concept we're doing for the customer insights right now. And we're looking forward to more and more automation and ideas about how to use the data that we store in such a way as to help our customers understand their business or understand their customers or understand the data that they store.
One of the presentations I heard you talking, you talked about when considering data, you should focus on the application need more than just the data need. What did you mean by that?
We kind of touched a little bit on that. What I mean by that is when we look at the need to have something new, we don't need to start from creating a new data set, but rather we need to understand what application needs to have, what kind of data it's looking for, and see if our data landscape provides that already. What I'm trying to avoid is the inconvenience of ETLs and cleaning of the data and making sure the data is set up in the correct way in order for two different applications to be able to draw any conclusions or show it within its landscape. So looking at why you're creating an application, what kind of data you already have, and then building up a new relationships and the new entities only if you don't have that represented yet within your data architecture is something that I was advising people to do.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there any ETL type functionality coming at a CDS level, or anything around master data management that you're seeing?
So from the CDS, you should be able to do the data export. That's available still. There is a webhooks and eventing available out into Azure. If that is something that you would like to use, there's of course plugins and Power Automate available to the customers if they would like to push the data out of the system or manipulate data in particular
Ah,
way.
very good, very good. Any lessons you've learned around the split from, relational to unstructured? The data logs, we're what, 18 months to 2 years on now since that split happened, since the data was, not just sitting in Azure SQL anymore. Any lessons learned, and how has that journey been like over the last 18 months to 2 years?
I think one of the biggest lesson that we've learned is that we think about ourselves as a platform, something forward looking and new, but at the same time, we have a huge customer base on a dynamic CRM, and those customers expect things to work a particular way. So we could have been much faster in doing all of that if we didn't have so much need of backwards compatibility within our APIs and our structures. But we worked through that and we figured out the way to deal with that. It is much easier to build something new. It's much harder to make sure that the backwards compatibility is still there and our customers are still happy about it. We found that we have a lot of layers within our CDM, Common Data Service. We have a security and the logic and the data and the storage layer. And throughout that, we do a lot of modeling and manipulation of the system. So making sure that we address all the needed nooks and crannies and making sure that new data types and new storage is easily accepted within the system and understood was another lesson learned. But now creating a completely new storages is easier because we're learning on our mistakes and we're recording them and understanding
Yeah,
them better.
it's good. It's good. Before we get on to some quick fire questions, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you for inviting me and thank you for letting me share my thoughts about the product that I'm working on daily.
It's great. It's great. Okay, so here we go for some quick fire questions. But before we start on those, actually, is there anybody else you'd recommend that I had come on the show, maybe out of your team or out of the broader product team, for as a future guest?
I think we have different people representing our product very well. If you're interested in more of the security aspects of a common data services, Paul Liu is somebody that I'm finding very knowledgeable about what new within the security and how to understand the security of dynamics better.
Was that Paula?
Paul Liu.
Paul Liu. Excellent. Okay, you ready for some quick fire questions?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Now, these are all random, right? So really off topic what we've discussed. Here we go. You're at a cafe. What type of drink do you order?
Flat white.
That's a good it's a good Kiwi drink. Very nice. What's your most powerful and vivid memory growing up?
Being on the seashore and spending a lot of time with my family, just swimming in the Baltic Sea.
Nice. When you were younger, what did you want to do when you grew up?
At some point, I was thinking that I'm going to be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and then I realized how complicated people are and decided that it's easier to deal with technology like computer science technologies.
That makes sense. This is a deep one. Would you rather die before your partner or after?
Before.
If you could change one thing about the way you were raised, what would you change?
I think I would put a little bit more of the idea of authority in my head. I was raised quite liberally, so I find that sometimes I overstep the boundaries and backpedal.
Oh, Maya, it's been so good to have you on the show and learn more about, the Common Data Service and, of course, your history with it. Before we go, if people want to follow what you do online, is there a blog they can go to? Is there Twitter, LinkedIn? Where do you recommend they check you out?
Mostly I blog as part of a Power Apps blogging. I am not on Twitter, sadly. LinkedIn is available for me as well.
Hey, thanks again for listening. If you've not left a rating and feedback on iTunes, please can you do it? Just navigate to nz365guy.com/iTunes, and that'll give you the opportunity to do that. I hope you found the show educational. That is my goal in doing it, is that you learn something that you perhaps hadn't heard of before or explained in a unique way. For me, with Maya, it was her simple concept of search is when you don't know where something is, and find is where you know where it is and you're really wanting to filter down into the details. Brilliant clarity. Full show notes can be found at nz365guy.com/184. Have a great day and see you next time.